Grayson said nothing. He moved with the calm precision of a man who had learned that words often made things worse. The slap of waves against the hull, the creak of wood underfoot, the gulls calling above, it was all familiar, all part of a ritual that soothed him more than conversation ever could. He secured Louisa to the dock with deliberate care, checking the mooring lines twice. His fingers worked without hesitation, the old sailors not still committed to muscle memory, each pull of the rope echoing decades spent on waters far from this polished harbor. The ropes were frayed in places, but strong. Like him. Once the boat was steady, he stepped onto the dock. His knees ached as they always did when the cold rolled in from the ocean, but he moved steadily, as if even the wind wouldn't dare rush him. The harbor behind him buzzed with forced laughter and clinking glasses, but he didn't look back. He turned instead to the stern of the Louisa and reached for the flag. The naval ensign, stitched long ago by his late wife, had once been vibrant. Now it was a sun-faded rectangle of navy and white, its edges fraying like an old photograph left in a window. With reverent hands, he unhooked it from the pole and began folding it into a triangle. Each fold was exact. Left over right, then down. Again and again. His fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from the care he gave to the motion. He pressed the folded flag gently against his chest, then placed it under one arm. Only then did he walk to the bench near slip 12. No one ever sat there. It faced the working end of the harbor, the maintenance shed, and the oil-stained rocks no tourist wanted to see. But Grayson liked it. From here, he could watch the tide roll in, slow and relentless, like time. He lowered himself onto the bench with effort and exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. From his coat pocket, he pulled out 2 items, a military dog tag and a letter, worn so thin it looked like it could dissolve if touched too harshly. The tag caught the sunlight briefly, a glint of metal that danced across the planks before fading. He held it between his fingers, turning it once, twice, before letting it rest in his palm. The letter remained folded. He didn't need to read it. He could recite every word. It had arrived in 1985, typed in a government office somewhere in Virginia, full of official phrases and delayed acknowledgments. But it had come with a single handwritten line from the commanding officer of the Northern Squall Recovery Operation. That line, 7 words, was the only reason Grayson had ever kept it. We never would have made it home. He didn't cry. Grayson hadn't cried in years. He used to, in the early days after the Louisa became his home, when his wife's absence still echoed in every creak of the floorboards. But now he just felt quiet. The marina buzzed louder behind him. Another toast was being made aboard the white yacht that had mocked his ship. More laughter. More selfies. They didn't see him. They didn't want to. A few people passed by, some pausing for a beat as if to say something, but no one did. Perhaps they thought he was just a tired old man. Perhaps they saw the naval insignia stitched faintly on his sweater and assumed it was decorative, like a vintage patch on a thrift store jacket. None of them asked. None of them knew. He sat still, letting the salt air sting his eyes, listening to the gulls. The Louisa bobbed gently beside him, old wood groaning under each ripple. He had built her with his own hands the year after he retired, plank by plank in the boat shed that used to sit at the north edge of town. His wife had painted the name on her bow. Their wedding anniversary. April 3rd, Louisa. She'd loved the water, even though she couldn't swim. He used to tease her about it. Now the boat was all he had left of those years, of her. He wondered if she would have told the harbor manager off, or if she would have held his hand and said the same thing she always said, let them think what they want. We know the truth. It wasn't just a boat. It wasn't even just a home. It was history. His. Hers. Everyone he had ever saved. Everyone he had ever lost. On one voyage, during his Navy days, the engine had failed midstorm in the North Atlantic. Freezing water had filled the bilge in seconds. While others panicked, Grayson had crawled through a maze of wires, elbows deep in oil and seawater, fixing a system no one else understood. The ship had survived because he did not give in. Because he never gave in. Now, 40 years later, a harbor regulation and a scratch had made him invisible. But he did not argue. He did not plead. He sat on a bench no one wanted, holding the memories no one asked about. He didn't think of revenge or retribution. Just of the Louisa. And his wife. And the cold waters off Greenland where a different kind of silence had once meant survival. And so he waited. With quiet dignity. As he always had. The wind shifted. It came in low, from the mouth of the bay, curling through the masts and shivering the flags. Grayson felt it before anyone else. A subtle drop in pressure, the kind that sailors feel deep in their bones. He looked up slowly, his hand still resting on the folded flag in his lap. A sound followed. Deep. Resonant. Like something ancient clearing its throat. It was the horn. Not the high-pitched screech of pleasure yachts or fishing vessels, but the low, deliberate call of something far larger. Something official. The kind of sound that marked presence, that demanded attention. Heads turned along the waterfront. Even the staff at the dockside cafe paused, trays in hand, trying to place the source. On the upper deck of the Justice, John Cameron froze mid-sentence, his hand clutching a flute of champagne. One of his guests leaned forward, shielding her eyes against the sun. Out past the marina's edge, where the water stretched into a soft morning haze, a shape was emerging. Steel gray and moving slow, it parted the mist like a blade through linen. The USS Kingsport. Not a relic, not a museum ship, but an active-duty Navy communications cruiser, her radar mast towering above her bridge, the sharp corners of her hull slicing through the harbor like she owned the tide. The conversation stopped. Laughter fell flat. Even the Bluetooth speakers, once blaring summer playlists across teak decks, were silenced by uncertainty. She wasn't supposed to be here. She didn't belong in this shallow, private marina. And yet, she came on, unhurried and unyielding. The Kingsport adjusted course, barely, but enough, and moved not toward the commercial port or the main channel, but directly toward the eastern slip. Toward Louisa. Toward Grayson. A smaller boat was deployed from her side, a ceremonial launch, deep blue and white, manned by 3 uniformed officers in dress whites. The gold trim on their sleeves caught the sun like flashbulbs. They moved with ceremony, not speed. No one spoke. Even the harbor manager, standing stiff near the office, seemed unsure whether to call for assistance or simply disappear. Grayson watched without reaction. The dog tag still rested in his hand, the letter beside him on the bench, edges fluttering in the sea breeze. The launch drew closer, slowing near the dock where Louisa waited. One officer rose and saluted the aging vessel before stepping onto the planks. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable beneath the rim of his cap. They did not walk past Grayson. They walked directly to him. The youngest of the 3, a lieutenant with silver wings on his chest, removed a document from a black folder. He held it without words, offering it to Grayson like an offering. Grayson took it slowly, unfolding the paper, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned its contents. Operation Northern Squall, Official Declassification Directive. Effective immediately, all records previously sealed regarding the rescue operation executed on February 12, 1984, off the coast of Greenland, were released to public domain. The narrative had been redacted for decades. But now, there it was. In plain ink and bold print. Chief Technician Grayson Miles, primary field mechanic and mission-critical operative responsible for restoring electrical and propulsion systems aboard USS Halberd during failure event. Result, 17 crew members rescued under blizzard conditions. Evacuation enabled by Miles' decision to remain on board after secondary systems failed. It wasn't a commendation. It was history. The lead officer stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone. His voice, when he finally spoke, was strong and clear. On behalf of the United States Navy, and in honor of your service under conditions that no man should have survived, we recognize you today, Mr. Miles. He turned to the harbor, to the yacht still looming beside Louisa, to the spectators who had once jeered. And we remind all present, not every hero arrives with a salute. Sometimes, they're already among you. Quiet. Overlooked. Anchored not in vanity, but in principle. Grayson did not rise. He only lifted his eyes. Met the gaze of the officer. Then, slowly, he offered the folded flag from his lap. The officer accepted it with reverence. And then, as if on cue, the sailors saluted in unison. 3 white gloves to 3 brows. Stillness gripped the dock. The partygoers on the Justice said nothing. Phones were raised again, but not with mockery this time. Something else. A need to capture a moment they didn't understand but knew they should remember. No one laughed now. Cameron, red-faced and silent, lowered his glass and stepped back from the railing. The harbor manager took a tentative step toward the gathering, then stopped, suddenly unsure of his own authority. And still Grayson did not speak. He simply turned the document over in his hands. As if to remind himself it was real. As if proof had finally arrived, not just of what he had done, but that someone, somewhere, had remembered. The wind caught the edge of the letter and flapped it gently, like a flag trying to rise. A single gull cried out overhead. And the Kingsport, still anchored in the bay, remained silent and still, bearing witness. Each morning, long before the town stirred and the sun warmed the masts, the harbor came alive with a familiar sound, the soft, steady thump of old boots on wooden planks and the creak of aged hinges as the cabin door of the Louisa opened. Grayson Miles rose at dawn, as he had since he first learned to sail. He moved slowly, but not feebly, each motion deliberate, as if waking the vessel with a whisper rather than a command. In the low light, he filled the old thermos with black coffee, always 2 sugars, never cream, and placed it in the same metal holder at the wheel, worn smooth from years of his hand resting beside it. There was no need to fish or explore. His was not a voyage of destinations anymore. It was a ritual. One of memory, of rhythm. Of honoring the silence between the tides. Each morning, he raised the same faded flag, the one his wife had stitched herself all those years ago. It fluttered against the early wind with stubborn pride, catching the light just enough to remind those who passed that it still meant something. The townspeople had begged *N to notice. At first it was just curiosity. Then respect. Some paused near the bench where he used to sit. They didn't speak to him, not yet. But they lingered longer than before, as if trying to understand what they had almost missed. A few left flowers at the base of the plaque. Others left coins, folded letters, or dog tags of their own. The plaque itself gleamed now, fresh brass polished weekly by the harbor manager, who came early and worked in silence. The man had not only apologized in private but had arranged for the Louisa's regular maintenance himself, often seeing tightening bolts and repainting trim with the care of someone paying off a quiet debt. Visitors came more frequently. Not tourists, but veterans. Sons and daughters of those who had served. One man traveled from Vermont just to shake Grayson's hand and show him a photograph. His father, once a crewman aboard the Halberd, had named his firstborn Miles after the man who saved his life. Journalists tried to cover the story, but Grayson rarely spoke. He declined interviews, offering only a single sentence once when asked by a reporter what the Navy's recognition had meant to him. "I remember the names," he said. "That's enough." And still, the Louisa sailed. Not far. Just enough to feel the shift of the water, the push of the wind, the whisper of things no one else could hear. Sometimes, when fog blanketed the harbor in a ghostly hush, children would press their noses to the glass at the cafe and whisper to each other about the ship that made the Navy come. Teachers brought students to see the plaque and tell them about a man who had fixed engines in the dark and kept 17 lives from sinking into silence. There was no ceremony for those mornings. Just Grayson, his thermos, the flag, and the memory of names not written on walls or monuments but carried quietly in a weathered coat pocket. The harbor changed, too. The new marina regulations were rewritten with a clause: historic and service-recognized vessels shall not be subject to cosmetic standards if deemed structurally sound. They called it the Miles Amendment. Other veterans were offered free slips and space for their boats. A retired Navy corpsman named Lena docked her trawler beside Louisa and sometimes joined Grayson for coffee. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. One afternoon, a small wooden sign appeared beside the main walkway. It read, "You never know who keeps your harbor safe." The Yacht of Justice was still there, but quieter now. Cameron no longer threw parties. His campaign shifted focus from infrastructure to veteran affairs. Some called it strategy. Others said it was guilt. Grayson said nothing. He didn't need to. Because each day, the town watched an old man board an older boat. They saw how he placed his hand on the hull before stepping aboard, as if greeting an old friend. How he saluted no one and everyone at once. How he sailed just far enough to remind them all that not every hero needed rescue, and not every storm came with warning. And on mornings when the mist crept in thick across the bay, and the deep horn of a Navy cruiser echoed in memory if not in truth, the townspeople paused. They watched the Louisa. They listened to the silence that followed. And they remembered that once, in a marina built for pride and polish, dignity arrived not with fanfare, but on the wake of quiet kindness. Because in the end, Grayson knew something the rest of the world had to relearn. Kindness without question is enough.